Good evening. We begin with breaking news from Pakistan, where a nation is in mourning after one of the deadliest attacks in its capital in nearly 2 decades. This is a Kenya News Update Today special report. I'm your host, and tonight, we're taking a deep dive into the devastating suicide bombing at a Shiite mosque in Islamabad that claimed at least 31 lives and left more than 170 injured during Friday prayers. We'll examine the immediate aftermath, the funeral processions now underway, the claim of responsibility by the Islamic State group, and what this means for Pakistan's security and the broader regional stability. We'll also debate the effectiveness of counter-terrorism measures and the persistent threat of sectarian violence. This is a complex story with profound human, political, and security dimensions. Let's get into it. The scene in Islamabad today is one of profound grief and heightened tension. Under a heavy security blanket, thousands of mourners gathered as Pakistan began the solemn task of burying the victims of yesterday's attack. Coffins, draped in green and black cloth, were carried through streets lined with security forces. The funerals are for the 31 people killed when an attacker entered the Khadija Tul Kubra Imambarga, a Shiite place of worship on the outskirts of the capital, opened fire, and then detonated an explosive device. The scale of the casualties is staggering. Let's look at the numbers that define this tragedy. The attack resulted in at least 31 confirmed fatalities. More than 170 individuals sustained injuries, many of them critical, overwhelming local hospitals. This represents the deadliest single attack in Islamabad since the 2008 Marriott hotel bombing, a grim milestone that underscores the severity of this event. The human cost is immense, with families shattered and a community left traumatized during what should have been a peaceful act of worship. Now, let's set the stage with some crucial background. Pakistan has a long and painful history with sectarian violence, particularly targeting its Shiite Muslim minority, which makes up roughly 15 to 20% of the population. Groups like the Islamic State's regional affiliate, known as ISIS-Khorasan or ISKP, and other militant organizations have repeatedly carried out attacks on Shiite mosques, religious processions, and community gatherings. The capital, Islamabad, while generally considered more secure than other regions, has not been immune. The 2008 Marriott bombing, referenced earlier, killed over 50 people. However, a successful attack of this magnitude in the heart of the federal territory signals a significant security breach. It raises immediate and alarming questions about intelligence failures, the penetration of militant networks into urban centers, and the current government's counterterrorism strategy. The timing is also critical, occurring during Friday prayers, the most attended weekly congregation, to maximize casualties and instill fear. This brings us to the first major point of debate: security and intelligence failure. How did a suicide bomber, armed and ready to detonate, manage to penetrate a place of worship in the capital? Supporters of the current security apparatus might argue that Pakistan faces an asymmetrical threat from a determined and shadowy enemy. They point to the overall decline in terrorist incidents in recent years due to sustained military operations. They might contend that preventing every single attack, especially by a lone wolf or a small cell, is nearly impossible in a country with Pakistan's complex security challenges. The quick response by emergency services and the massive security deployment for the funerals could be cited as evidence of competence in crisis management. However, critics present a far more damning perspective. They argue that this attack is a catastrophic intelligence and security failure. A mosque, especially one belonging to a frequently targeted minority, should be a hardened target, particularly in the capital. The fact that the attacker could open fire inside the building before detonating his device suggests a complete breakdown of perimeter security and possibly insider complicity. Critics will point to a potential lack of coordination between various intelligence agencies, political distractions, or a reallocation of security resources away from counterterrorism to other domestic concerns. The bottom line from this viewpoint is that the state failed in its most basic duty, protecting its citizens at prayer. This failure erodes public trust and emboldens extremist groups. Now, let's examine the perpetrators. The Islamic State group has claimed responsibility for the attack. This is significant. IS's regional affiliate, ISKP, has been particularly virulent in its anti-Shiite ideology and has claimed numerous attacks in Pakistan and neighboring Afghanistan. Their claim transforms this from a tragic incident into a deliberate act of international jihadist terrorism with clear sectarian motives. It's an attempt to reignite sectarian tensions within Pakistan and demonstrate continued operational capability despite leadership losses. The choice of target. A Shiite mosque is textbook is strategy, strike a religious minority to provoke broader communal conflict and undermine the state. This claim also complicates Pakistan's delicate regional diplomacy, particularly with the Taliban government in Afghanistan, which is also battling ISKP, but is accused by Pakistan of harboring militants who launch cross-border attacks. Our second debate point centers on the response, mourning versus mobilization. The immediate, visible response is national mourning. Political leaders across the spectrum have condemned the attack. The funerals are a powerful display of communal solidarity and religious resolve. This mourning is essential for healing and demonstrating that the nation stands united against terror. It sends a message of resilience to the attackers. Proponents of this approach argue that a dignified, unified national mourning period is the appropriate first step, preventing knee-jerk reactions and allowing for a measured, strategic security review. On the other side of this debate are those calling for immediate and decisive mobilization, not just mourning. They argue that Pakistan has mourned too many times. After each major attack, the Army Public School massacre in Peshawar, the Sawan Sharif Shrine bombing, there are tears, condemnations, and temporary crackdowns, but the cycle continues. Critics demand that this attack must be a turning point. They call for a sweeping, nationwide counterterrorism operation, a ruthless purge of militant networks regardless of their ideological alignment, and a fundamental overhaul of the intelligence apparatus. They argue that without such a mobilized, militarized response, the mourning will simply be a prelude to the next tragedy. The question is whether the government has the political will to launch such a potentially disruptive campaign. Let's delve into the regional and international implications. This attack does not occur in a vacuum. The security situation in South Asia is incredibly fluid. In Afghanistan, the Taliban regime is struggling to contain ISKP. There are persistent allegations from Pakistan that the Afghan Taliban, despite their own fights, provide sanctuary to groups like the Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. This attack, claimed by IS, could be used by Islamabad to increase pressure on Kabul, potentially straining already tense relations. Furthermore, it draws attention to the global reach of the Islamic State's ideology, even as its so-called caliphate was destroyed years ago. For the international community, including the United States under President Donald Trump and allies, it's a reminder that the terrorist threat in this region remains potent and can destabilize a nuclear-armed state. For Kenya and East Africa, it underscores the global, networked nature of extremist violence, relevant to our own security concerns with groups like al-Shabaab. Our third and final debate focuses on the long-term solution, security crackdowns versus addressing root causes. The traditional and often immediate state response to such an attack is a security-centric one: more checkpoints, more surveillance, more military operations in tribal areas, and targeted killings. Proponents argue that you need a strong, uncompromising security fist to crush militant capabilities. They believe in degrading the terrorist infrastructure through force, making it harder for them to plan and execute attacks. This approach has yielded results in the past, clearing regions of militant strongholds. However, a growing chorus of analysts and civil society leaders argues that a purely militarized response is treating the symptom, not the disease. They point to the root causes of extremism, pervasive sectarian hatred preached in some seminaries, socio-economic marginalization of certain communities, a justice system that often fails victims of sectarian violence, and the historical use of militant groups as proxies by state actors. Until Pakistan seriously tackles the ideological underpinnings of groups like IS and the social fissures they exploit, they argue, no amount of security operations will deliver lasting peace. This requires educational reform, economic inclusion, and an unwavering commitment to protecting all religious minorities. It's a harder, longer path, but one that addresses the source of the poison, not just its violent eruptions. As we conclude this deep dive, the images from Islamabad are heartbreaking. 31 lives ended in an act of hatred. Over 170 families are now dealing with injury and trauma. The claim by the Islamic State is a stark declaration of war on Pakistan's social fabric. The debates we've outlined, security failure versus an unstoppable threat, mourning versus mobilization, military action versus societal reform, are not academic. They are the urgent questions facing Pakistan's leadership today. The choices made in the coming days and weeks will determine whether this attack becomes a turning point or just another tragic statistic in a long history of violence. The world, and particularly this region, will be watching closely. For Kenya News Update today, this has been a special report. Our thoughts are with the victims and their families. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today for continued coverage and analysis of this developing story.